Want to be a better card maker? Let's talk about that. First, choose an area you want to improve. Maybe it's design principles, maybe it's how to choose colors, often it's a technique, and for this video, I'm focusing on ink blending. Second, take some time and learn about it. Take a class, watch some videos. When I think about my friend Jessica's work, flawless ink blending is the first thing that comes to my mind. She is definitely an ink blending expert. Check out these huge panels with absolutely perfect blending. I want to ink blend like Jessica. Third, break it down. Build your skills and put your own spin on it. For instance, Jessica uses different inks than I do, different paper, even different blending tools. I can still learn the basics from her using the tools and supplies I have on hand. So let's break down ink blending. I'm going to work up to a big panel and I'll start with something small. How about some autumn leaves? I've got this set of dies from Waffle flower that comes with a solid piece for each leaf as well as an outline piece. I've cut 8 of the double leaf branch, and for the leaves themselves, I'm going to use some not really fall colors to create some fall colors. First, whenever I'm ink blending onto a lot of little pieces, I like to adhere them temporarily to a pad of recycled newsprint. This helps me keep track of all of them, and it also helps keep my hands clean. When blending small pieces like this, I like to use smaller blending tools, either foam finger daubers like this, or these mini ink blending brushes from Uptown. And now I can start blending my colors. I've got Glam, which is a deep red purple, and Flame, which is a red orange, along with Glitz, which is yellow. Now here's where those differences pop up. Jessica uses Bristol Smooth Cardstock, which is definitely very smooth and a really good one to try if you're having trouble with your ink blending. Although my best ever ink blending tip is more about your inks, and I'll get to that in a minute. After years of trying all the inks and all the cardstocks and all the tools, I've settled into my favorites, and for cardstock, that's Hammermill Digital Copy Cover. It's 100 pounds, bright white, and very smooth. I like it because I can use it for lots of techniques: stamping, ink blending, stencils, Copic coloring, and it reduces the number of specialty white cardstocks I need to have on hand. Another difference is that Jessica prefers foam tools for blending. My preference is brushes because they don't get damaged when I'm stenciling like the foam can, and again, I don't want to have too many options on hand. The exception, of course, is that huge tray of daubers, which I've had for years, and they do come in handy from time to time. Finally, inks. Jessica uses Distress Oxides, and they are creamy and definitely built to blend. Over the years, I've tried a number of different inks, and again, I've settled on my favorite, my Catherine Pooler inks. By buying only these inks, I can focus on building that collection as well as getting really good at working with them since they all share the same properties. Starting with small pieces like these leaves is a great way to practice your ink blending because they're very forgiving. If your blend isn't smooth, you can't even really tell, and in fact, with high contrast colors like this, a bit of rough blending will actually add some visual interest. To add even more interest, shimmer, and texture to my leaves, I spritzed some water into my Altenew Gold watercolor and I gave them a good splatter. To assemble the leaves with an inlaid die cut look, I also cut the solid base from white cardstock and the outlines from some honey gold satin cardstock. I used a silicone mat and I coated a base with some tape runner. The glue will not stick to the silicone like it would to my glass surface, and that means less cleanup later. Before putting the outline onto the base, I gently bend the veins of the leaves upwards so they won't stick down. They're so thin that they may move a little and not be in the right place when I go to put the colorful part of the leaf in. So if I kind of line up the leaf and the vein at the same time, everything will fit in perfectly and I'll get a nice smooth leaf with a gold outline and vein. Okay, I'm going to come back and finish this after the next card, where I'm going to graduate to a larger area. The fourth part of improving a skill is to keep practicing. You can cut a panel smaller, but I'm just going to mask off the edges of my panel with some 1-inch mint tape. I love this no measure method of getting the masking straight and exactly equal on both sides. This time I'm mixing orange and blue, which are complementary colors, and we know that can be tricky. Flame is quite a red orange, and to get a brighter tone, I'm actually going to put down a layer of Glitz first. I'm left-handed, so I'm most comfortable working from left to right, and I blend the yellow ink about 2/3 of the way down, always starting at the edge when my blending brush is full, and then letting the pressure up as I move toward the right. I go back over it several times to get really good coverage and to saturate my cardstock. And that's my one best tip that I was talking about. To get a really good, seamless blend, you want that cardstock to be wet. This allows the color to really mix and become friends. Then I go over it all with flame, and that's giving it even more saturation. So now when I flip my mat around and I come in from the left with the Uptown, which is a deep greenish blue, I do the same thing. I put the full brush down on the left edge and blend toward that orange. This time I'm using slightly bigger blending brushes since the area is larger. I keep putting down more and more ink, saturating this part of the paper, and especially the center where the colors are meeting. To finish it off, I just go back and forth with the two main colors until everything's very wet and the blending is looking smooth. Now I got excited and I took the masks off before I meant to, but that means you can get a good look at how smooth this blend is. But another good idea when you're practicing your ink blending is to have a few, well, let's call them backup plans, just in case your ink blending doesn't turn out the way you want it to. I'm putting the masking tape down again, but this time I'm using the lines on the sticky mat for placement, and that's leaving less of the blended portion exposed. This will give me a subtle frame of plain ink blending later. It also left small amounts of the panel edges exposed, and I'm pretty sure you can guess what happened there. Now back to backup plan number 1. I'm putting a leafy stencil from a Colorful Life Designs over the panel and simply blending the same colors of ink through it. This will add texture to my blended area and hide any imperfections in the blend. You can do this when the panel's dry, but it's even better when it's still wet. Backup plan number 2, similar to my die cut leaves, I'm adding water to my metallic gold watercolor palette and using a brush to add some splatter. You could splatter water or white gouache instead if you want. Other backup plans could be to stamp on top of it or even to cut it up with smaller dies. And I'll show you a couple more, but a practice panel never needs to be wasted, even if you're not happy with it. To finish this card, I trimmed down the panel to get rid of that overblending, and I added a popped up sentiment with a shadow. Since I had ended up with more blue than orange, and since that orange was really glowing, I flipped the panel so that the area the sentiment was covering was blue. Covering an area of your blend is another great backup plan for a practice panel. So I'm working toward a full panel worthy of Jessica, but first I'm going to practice on the background for my pretty inlaid leaves. I'm going for a monochrome look with a glow in the center, so I'm starting by covering the whole panel with my lightest shade, which is Sandcastle. I'm using the silicone mat again, which I like for blending panels. It's not sticky, but it is grippy, so it will hold in place pretty well with minimal interference from me. So now the paper is wet, and before it can dry, I really want to get that next darker shade down around all the edges. I'm using macchiato and blending in from each corner, lifting the pressure as I move toward the center. Finally, I put s'mores down along the very edges to really add some depth and definition. I see I'm getting little smudges where my fingers are landing, so I grabbed some post-it tape to help with that. I'm not sure if you can see, but there are definitely a couple of smudges, but I'm not too worried since I'm planning on using that cover-up backup plan with my leaves. Once it dried though, I felt like I wanted the color to be a little warmer. So I grabbed my buttercream ink, which is a pale yellowy beige, and I went over the whole panel. It definitely warmed it up a bit, and as a bonus, it got rid of those smudges and imperfections, and now this panel could stand on its own if I wanted it to. To finish this one, I popped up the leaves, trimmed the panel a bit, and then added that same Paper Rose Thanks die with a shadow that I had put s'mores ink onto. The 5th lesson is to repeat. Now I'm going to be working on that fully blended panel, and I'll keep all of it in so that you can see what it takes to get a smooth blend on a larger panel. It definitely takes some time and some elbow grease. I'm going to use 2 greens, Martini and Deck the Halls, with Cranberry Fizz in the center. I'm starting on the left with the Martini ink, and this time I'm going to blend it just over 1/3 of the cardstock, dark on the left, fading to the right, just like last time. Flip the mat, and now I'm bringing in the Deck the Halls in the same way. It takes a few times to go over it enough to get that really deep coverage and to get these areas of the cardstock really wet. But I've left that center white. I want to have an area of pure color for each of my 3 colors as well as blended areas so that you really can't tell where one starts and the other ends. I cleaned my mat so that I'm not picking up green ink with my red brush, and I started by blending right in the center of the panel where I want that pure color to be. Just like the ends, I want dark, deep coverage and to get that paper wet. Now that I've got the 3 colors down, I go back and forth between each pair, blending, blending, blending. The key at this point is just to not panic. Every time you get an area that you don't love, just add more ink. And if you leave it to dry and when you come back you don't love it, add even more ink. To finish this card, after all that work, I didn't want much to distract from the blend. I used a frame die from Pigment Craft Company to just add some definition to the panel, and I used that same thanks sentiment. This time I cut the shadow directly from my blended panel and I popped it up to emphasize the sentiment without breaking the blend. And without any smudges, I had no idea where I would even put any sequins or gems. Now, even though I've been working on my ink blending, these 5 steps will work for any technique or tool you want to improve with. However long we've been crafting and making cards, I think we all have a desire to continually improve our skills. What technique will you choose to improve first? Now you can use this link to head to Jessica's channel, where she's sharing her best tips for one of my favorite techniques. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.